Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask one hell of a question. So I will flip it in here for you guys, and he wants to know, hey, since you're saying that training probably doesn't matter that much once guys get on pretty hefty doses of gear and anabolics, what's up with the bodybuilders before the 90s versus today? You know, those guys had much smaller legs than the guys today. These guys, are they focusing more on training? Doesn't this kind of disprove what you're saying? So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on my crafting a little bit. Of course, you guys know I wear the hat because it makes me look like a goddamn sexual tyrannosaurus. And bonus points for anyone who knows the reference again. All right, great question. So what we need to understand is that looking back to bodybuilders from like pre-90s, because, you know, obviously guys like Dorian Yates had pretty massive legs up in the 90s. But there were some fundamental drug changes that happened. As Lee Haney said it on his way out, it's turning into chemical warfare. That was a direct quote, and that's why he wanted to get out. So, yeah, there were some fundamental changes. And when you guys look at someone like Arnold, guys from his era, you're like, well, his legs were smaller than these guys, proportionately smaller. And that's where we're going to go with this, because Arnold had massive legs. You guys saying Arnold didn't train legs? The guy could deadlift like 700 pounds. I believe he did so at a powerlifting meet and had like a 500-pound squat. We also saw him do like 315 on deep squats in a video for 20 reps before. The guy had legs. He had legs. He trained the hell out of his legs. Look at his total workload and volume on his admitted leg work. Multiple times a week sometimes too. So let's talk a little bit about proportions and what's going on here. Because I'm going to link the other video down below for you guys, so I don't need to cover all the stuff about the drugs themselves of proving all of that. There's pretty good data to extrapolate from on that. So I don't need to cover all of that specifically again about how training may not matter that much. But let's look at the hormonal side of things. All right, biochemistry lesson here. Back in that day, during the 70s, 80s, and even up through part of the 90s, what was the primary mechanism as far as drugs go? The primary sort of substances these guys used to put on size. This is not a tough question. The correct answer is anabolic steroids. That's what they used. That was about the only drugs most of them had. Very few of those guys had anything else but anabolics to help them gain muscle as far as pharmaceuticals go, right? Anyone disagreeing there? Anybody? Anyone aware of them having access to a lot of other stuff? Because I'm not. There is a little bit, but that's a whole other topic. Maybe we could cover some of that later too, of what happened with Lyle Zato and everything. But they used anabolics. How do anabolics build muscle? They bind to the androgen receptor. They bind to the androgen receptor, and they cause the androgen receptor in the nuclei of your muscle cells to release IGF-1 locally in that muscle cell, thus causing it to grow. Nothing magical about it. It's just basic science, guys. All right, for the unaware, and there's evolutionary reasons behind this, we believe, but for the unaware, androgen receptors are not evenly dispersed through your body. A lot of people don't know that, and that's okay. As we all learn, we learn things as we go. Different muscles in your body have more androgen receptors in the nuclei than others do. All right? So it would stand to reason, using that logic, that anabolic steroids and testosterone make some muscles grow faster than others. Because if you have more receptors available, you're going to get more anabolic activity. Pretty straightforward. Again, anyone care to disagree with that logic? If you do, feel free to explain down below how that logic is incorrect. But if you don't have even numbers of androgen receptors through the different muscles in the body, that some muscles have more in their cells than others do, you would expect certain muscles to grow faster than others. Now, in humans, Homo sapien, that's what we are as a species, there seems to be a distribution in there to give us strong secondary male characteristics. Now, anthropologists believe that this exists so that people could identify males from a long distance, and it also warned other tribes if they were dealing with tribes of men who had really high testosterone levels, it might be more aggressive from a distance. So it actually created what we call a form of deterrence when they saw over on the horizon or across the plains men from a tribe that had certain parts of their body more developed than others. Anyone care to guess what those are? How about your shoulders and upper chest? What we find in human males, and actually human females too, but females don't have many androgen receptors. Your androgen receptor distribution tends to be highest the closer you are up here to the neck, the trapezius, and as you go further down the body, those receptors get less in the muscle groups as you go down towards the feet. So, the muscles that seem to grow the quickest from anabolics, like testosterone, trenbolone, androgen, or things like the traps, delts, upper chest is the fastest, then the lower chest and arms behind it, upper back behind it, and then things like glutes, quads, hamstrings, calves grow slower as a result of the same amount of anabolics and other things. So therefore, one would expect that if anabolics were the only substances being put in the body to help with growth, that the whole shoulder girdle would grow the fastest, arms and the rest of the chest further down, and lats and things would grow a little bit slower than they do in proportion, and then legs would grow a little slower in proportion than those do. So the proportions of someone who is using just straight anabolics, testosterone, trenbolone, things like that, versus a natural, you would expect them to have a little less leg growth and a little more shoulder and upper torso growth than someone who wasn't using any drugs of any type, right? Based upon just basic biology and androgen receptor distribution, you would expect their legs to not grow quite as fast. They're going to grow, obviously. They're going to grow. You train your legs, you're going to grow. You put anabolics in your body, your legs are going to grow. They're not going to grow as fast, though. If that's the only pathway by which you're doing them. And you see that because if you guys look at it, some true naturals actually have pretty decent legs. Oftentimes they lack shoulders when we really compare what we think of as the classic bodybuilder golden era physiques where the guys are just using anabolics and a lot of training, right? A guy who's a true natural, you do see a little less arm and stuff, you see quite a bit less in their whole shoulder girdle usually, but sometimes their legs are pretty close. They proportion out differently. Now, you saw guys coming through in like Dorian Yates's era, and what do we see? Started seeing some really big legs coming out. More big legs, like legs that were disproportionate. Yeah, you had Tom Platz, but Tom Platz was a genetic freak. Tom Platz, I think they had said something crazy like he was able to squat over 200 pounds the first time he ever worked out. And he trained his legs insane all the time, even when he wasn't on drugs. All right, he focused on them and was very, very genetically gifted in his legs. That was a rare individual from the golden era. As you got up into the 90s, other drugs started being added to the mix. Dorian Yates admitted to using 8 units of pharmaceutical-grade growth hormone every day during his off-season. All right, that's a lot of growth hormone. That's a lot of growth hormone. Now, he doesn't ever talk about it, but it was always rumored that he used insulin too, and he was one of the first guys to start using insulin. Insulin and IGF-1 started becoming very, very popular in the late 90s also. Now, that being said, anabolics and testosterone have a certain affinity as far as distribution is that they make certain muscles grow faster than others in the body, right? These other substances don't share those same affinities. They don't work off the same receptors. They don't work off the same receptors in the body. Now, they all work through getting IGF-1 into the muscles, but that distribution of how it's released is going to be different. It's arguable. I don't know how good the data is on it, but I have heard it suggested that the drug IGF-1 may have more affinity for leg muscle because of the endurance nature of your legs, and therefore the potential for higher insulin sensitivity in your legs than it does for the upper body. That's a hypothesis. That is not a proven hypothesis. That's not as proven as the androgen receptor thing, but that being said, We're now adding drugs into the body that have a more even distribution, being stacked in on top of the anabolics with this era of guys, and then the IGF-1 being very, very commonly abused in large amounts by those who can afford it, may, and possibly even insulin, may have a slightly higher affinity for the lower body. So if guys have been taking drugs for decades to facilitate muscle growth that make their upper body, and particularly their shoulder girdle, have a better response to that drug, that anabolic drug, than it does your legs, they're going to have a certain proportion from that. But when you start introducing very copious amounts of drugs that don't have that same distribution affinity and that might actually slightly favor the legs, wouldn't you expect the guys to have a lot bigger legs? I think that's a very, very viable explanation, because truth be told, even if you're going to try to argue about the training, look at some of the training some of these guys did even for their legs. Look at Arnold's leg training. Are you guys honestly thinking that some of these guys today, whether it's anyone from the late 90s or anyone from Flex Wheeler or Dorian Yates, all the way up to Branch Warren or Ronnie Coleman? Well, Ronnie Coleman was a freak. We'll leave him out. That guy had his own freak level of training that these other guys didn't come close to. But you take these other guys, you really think they did more leg work than Arnold did? Look at Arnold's leg training. Do you guys really think they were doing more leg training than he was, or more training than Franco Columbu was doing for his legs up in the late 70s, early 80s? You guys really think they're doing more leg training? Some of them are doing less. Some of these guys with enormous legs did less leg training. I mean, Dorian Yates, mid-90s, late 90s. Dude won, I don't know how many Mr. Olympias, 6, 7, 8? Hell, I don't know. It was a lot of them. The guy had much bigger legs than the guys from the previous era. He did less. You look at his total leg training, he did less leg training than guys like Arnold did. When you look at their programs as written out and as documented, he did less leg training. You guys really think it's because they're training their legs more? Or do you think it's because they're using drugs that are making their legs grow faster? Because they're not training them more. I don't see any evidence of that. But I do see evidence of new drugs being added to the mix, higher doses of what was already there, combined with throwing new drugs into the mix that have a different receptor affinity through the body than the other drugs that guys are using. Of course, it's going to cause a different distribution of muscle growth. That's reasonable. That's logical, right? But people don't know that if they aren't aware of the fact that anabolics themselves do not grow muscle evenly through all muscles in the body. All muscles do not respond the same to those substances. You have more receptors in some muscles than others. And that is pretty well documented in the scientific literature as far as I'm aware. So there's a lot more going on here than just the training. And you know what? I think that's just as plausible of an explanation as any I've heard anyone else give. You guys can choose to disagree, but I think you're going to have a heck of a time coming up with a better explanation. You feel free to do so, though, if you like. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.